The alien marriage contract I didn't read. Kyle stood in the middle of the giant alien hall, holding a glowing tablet. It was warm in his hands, almost alive. Around him, hundreds of alien eyes watched in silence. The air felt heavy. "This is just a peace agreement, right?" Kyle asked, glancing at the tall alien standing beside him. Commander Juno, leader of the alien race called the Velari, gave a short nod. "Yes, human. Peace between your Earth and our world begins with this signature." Kyle had been trained for this. He was Earth's chosen ambassador. He had studied the Velari language, their food, even their history. But no one had mentioned this kind of ceremony. No one told him the hall would be filled with alien warriors, or that a strange alien woman would be standing so close to him. Her name was Thalexa. She was tall, fierce-looking, and wore armor made of silver bones. Her glowing blue eyes hadn't left Kyle's face since he entered the room. Kyle looked at the contract again. It was written in Velari language. He understood most of it, but one line at the bottom confused him. It read, "The union shall begin after bloodmark is given." Union. Kyle whispered, "Bloodmark." But before he could ask more, the crowd began to chant. The sound echoed through the hall like a thunderstorm. Juno stepped back and raised his arms. Sighing, "Human," he said loudly, "let peace begin." Kyle felt unsure, but he didn't want to insult them. He took a deep breath and pressed his thumb on the glowing tablet. The room exploded in cheers. Velari warriors beat their chests. Alien women threw petals made of glowing crystals. Strange music filled the air. Kyle smiled nervously. "So, we're friends now." Thalexa stepped forward. She grabbed his hand, looked deep into his eyes, and said something that made his heart skip a beat. "Now you are mine." Kyle blinked. "Sorry. What did you say?" But she didn't repeat it. Instead, she turned to the crowd and lifted his arm in the air like a trophy. The Velari cheered louder. Suddenly, Kyle felt a strange symbol burn into the skin of his wrist. He looked down and saw a glowing mark forming, a blue swirl with 3 dots. "What is this?" he gasped. "It is your blood mark," Thalexa said. "Now the bond is complete." Kyle turned to Juno. "Wait, I thought this was a peace agreement." Juno smiled calmly. "It is. Peace between Velari and Earth through sacred marriage bonding." Kyle's heart stopped. Marriage. Thalexa pulled him close. "Yes, human. You are now my mate, as written in our sacred traditions." Kyle felt dizzy. "But I didn't know. I didn't agree to this." "You signed," Juno said. "The contract is binding. If you break it now, it will be seen as an insult, a reason for war." Kyle looked around. Everyone was smiling, clapping, celebrating. Only he stood frozen in shock. Thalexa leaned in. Her voice was soft but firm. "You are tired. I understand. But our first bonding begins tonight." "Bonding," Kyle whispered. She gave him a grin that made his stomach twist. "Yes. We have many customs to fulfill, and 7 sacred bondings must be completed in the next 7 nights." "7," Kyle muttered. "What happens if I can't do it?" She looked at him seriously. "You must, or the bond will fail. And your world may not survive the insult." 2 large alien guards walked forward and stood behind Kyle. Thalexa gently took his hand. "Come, husband," she said. "Our room is prepared." Kyle tried to protest, but the cheering, the music, the heat of the room, all of it drowned his voice. He was led through a tunnel lit with red lights. He looked back once at the glowing hall. He had come to make peace. But now, he was married to a warrior alien woman he barely knew, and she didn't look like she planned to let him rest. "Number 1 nearly killed me," but she was smiling. Kyle lay flat on the bed, staring at the strange alien ceiling above him. It shimmered like flowing water, with soft glowing patterns that pulsed in time with his rapid heartbeat. He couldn't move. Every muscle in his body ached. His legs felt like they had been hit by a cargo ship. His arms were trembling. His chest was rising and falling like he had run 50 miles nonstop. And yet, beside him, standing tall and calm, was Thalexa. She didn't look tired at all. In fact, she was smiling. "That was number one," she said gently, her voice calm but proud. "You survived." Kyle turned his head slowly, eyes wide in disbelief. "That was number one." "Yes," she said, as if she had just taken him on a nice walk in the park. "Only 6 more remain." Kyle groaned and dropped his head back against the soft alien pillow. "I'm going to die." Thalexa walked over and sat beside him. Her body still glowed faintly with heat and energy. She didn't even seem to be sweating. Her breathing was normal. His wasn't. "I warned you to stretch first," she said with a little smirk. "Human muscles are soft, but interesting." Kyle didn't respond. He was too busy trying not to pass out. Earlier that night, after the ceremony, he was brought to the bonding chamber. The room looked like a mix between a luxury spa and a gladiator arena. Silken sheets, soft music, warm air, and strange alien tools lining the walls. Kyle had asked, "What exactly do Velari call bonding?" Thalexa only smiled. "It is how our souls connect. Through body, through breath, through challenge. Velari do not kiss. We conquer." Kyle didn't understand what that meant at the time. He did now. The bonding session had started gently. At least Thalexa thought it was gentle. She had lifted him with one arm, tested his balance, stretched his limbs like she was shaping dough. Then she activated a ritual platform that adjusted gravity inside the room. Every step Kyle took felt heavier. His bones groaned. His muscles screamed. "Why is the gravity changing?" he had yelled. "Velari bonding begins with resistance training," she explained, pulling him into a wild spin and lifting him high into the air like he weighed nothing. "Your body must fight to grow stronger." "To grow stronger for what?" Kyle gasped. "For the rest of the bondings, of course." Back in bed now, Kyle tried to breathe slowly. He turned to her. "You really enjoy this, don't you?" Thalexa nodded. "I have never had a mate with such soft skin and loud noises. It is exciting." Kyle frowned. "Loud noises. You scream very well," she said proudly. "It makes me feel powerful." Kyle covered his face with his hand. "I wasn't screaming. I was expressing pain." "Same thing," she said calmly. Then she reached over and placed a cold cloth on his forehead. "You will need rest. Tomorrow is number 2. His eyes snapped open. "Tomorrow?" "Yes. The bondings must happen every night, no delays. It is sacred. If we stop now, it means you have failed." Kyle sat up halfway. His back screamed in protest. "And what happens if I fail?" Thalexa's smile faded. For the first time, her face turned serious. "If you fail, I must return you to the council, and you will be punished for dishonoring the bond." "Punished? What kind of punishment?" Thalexa looked down. Some humans were not returned. Others were sent to the testing chambers. Kyle's heart began to race again. "There were others before me." She nodded. "Yes, but you are the first to pass number 1. Kyle felt sick. What happened to the others? Thalexa placed a hand on his chest. They were not strong enough. Their minds broke before their bodies did. Kyle pushed her hand away, gently but firmly. "Why didn't anyone tell me about this before I signed the contract?" Thalexa tilted her head. "Because the strongest bonds are forged by surprise. If you knew everything, you would have run." "Exactly," Kyle said. "But you didn't run," she said softly. "And you're still here. That means something." Kyle sat in silence. He had been forced into a marriage he didn't want, with a woman who didn't understand human limits. He had almost passed out from just one bonding. There were 6 more. But something in her eyes had changed. That warrior fire was still there, but now there was concern too. "You really care about this bond, don't you?" he asked. "I do," Thalexa whispered. "Because I chose you." Kyle raised an eyebrow. "What do you mean?" "I was given many names," she said. "I read your records. I watched your training. I saw your defiance. You do not follow orders blindly." Kyle gave a weak laugh. "And you thought that made me a good husband?" "No," she said with a gentle smile. "It made you a good partner." As Kyle drifted off into sleep, her words stayed in his mind. He didn't want this bond, but he didn't want to fail either. And deep inside, a part of him wondered what number 2 might be like. But mostly, he was scared. Because Thalexa was already stretching beside the bed, preparing for tomorrow. And she was still smiling. The truth about number 6, and the secret behind it. Kyle woke up with a sharp pain in his lower back. It felt like someone had dropped a bag of bricks on him. He groaned and tried to sit up but flopped back down onto the soft alien bedding. "Careful," Thalexa said from the other side of the room. She was already dressed in a new armor set, sleek, black, and shining like polished stone. She walked over and offered him a drink. The cup glowed faintly blue. "What's this?" Kyle asked, sniffing the odd steam. "Muscle recovery serum," she said. "It's made from crushed glow fruit and zern roots." Kyle frowned. "Zern roots? They taste like wet socks," Thalexa said without emotion. "But they work." Kyle reluctantly sipped it. His face twisted in disgust. "It does taste like socks." Thalexa only smiled. "You survived number 2, she said. "That is rare." Kyle leaned his head back and sighed. "I don't know how many more I can take." Her smile faded. "What's wrong?" he asked, noticing her sudden change. She looked at him for a long moment, then spoke in a quieter voice than usual. "There's something you need to know." Kyle raised an eyebrow. "Okay. About what?" Thalexa looked toward the wall. There was a symbol carved into it, a spiral with 6 dots. About number 6. Later that day, when Kyle could walk again, Thalexa brought him to a hidden chamber deep beneath the Velari temple. It was dark, cold, and quiet. The walls were smooth, glowing faintly with ancient text. Strange carvings ran along the floor, showing warriors, stars, and circles linked by fire. "What is this place?" Kyle asked. "Few are allowed to come here," Thalexa replied. "This is where we remember the ones who didn't make it." She pointed at a wall covered in names. Some were written in Velari symbols, but a few were in English. Kyle stepped closer. One name caught his eye. Jacob Sanders, human. Kyle's heart dropped. Wait, this guy was human. He was one of us. Thalexa nodded slowly. He came before you. Many cycles ago. Chosen like you. Strong. Brave. What happened to him? Kyle whispered. She didn't answer right away. Then she touched the 6th dot in the spiral carving on the wall. Number 6 happened. They sat in silence for a while. Kyle stared at the glowing flames around the room. The fire didn't burn. It floated like mist, warm but not hot. I don't get it, Kyle said finally. What's so bad about number 6? You keep talking about it like it's a curse. Thalexa took a deep breath. Velari bonding is more than body. After number 4, it becomes about spirit, about energy, about opening your mind and heart to your partner. She looked directly at Kyle. Number 6 is where minds either connect forever or break. Kyle swallowed hard. So it's like mental fusion. Yes, Thalexa said. It's where we let the deepest emotions flow. Memories, pain, desires, everything is shared. There are no secrets in number 6. Kyle stood up and began pacing. That's dangerous. You're saying I'll see your mind, and you'll see mine. Yes, she said softly, but more than that. You'll feel what I feel. My anger, my grief, my loneliness. and I'll feel yours. Kyle turned back to her, nervous. What happened to Jacob? He couldn't handle what he saw inside me, she said without blinking. And I couldn't handle what was inside him. He lost control. I lost him. Kyle sat back down, stunned. You've done this before, he said quietly. You've bonded with someone. You lost him at number 6, and now you're trying again. Felexa looked away. I didn't choose to try again. The council chose you. But when I read your file, I saw something different. Kyle frowned. What did you see? You were broken too, she said gently. You lost family. You had pain. But you kept fighting. You still had hope. Kyle's chest tightened. His memories of Earth, of the fire, of his younger brother who never made it out, came rushing back. He had buried them. Deep. Don't bring that up, he said quietly. You'll have to face it in number 6, she whispered. There's no wall to hide behind. They sat in silence again, the kind of silence that felt heavier than words. Finally, Kyle stood up. If I make it past number 6, what happens? Felexa rose with him. You become one of us. Truly. Your body, your mind, your spirit, merged with mine. And with that, our worlds will never go to war. And if I fail? She looked into his eyes. Then you die. Kyle took a deep breath. I'm not ready, he said honestly. You don't have to be ready, Felexa replied. You just have to be willing. That night, Kyle couldn't sleep. He kept thinking of Jacob, of his brother, of what Felexa might see inside him. What if she saw the anger he kept hidden, the fear, the guilt? Would she still want him? But one thought kept coming back to him. What will I see inside her? She was strong, unshakable, but behind those glowing blue eyes was something broken too. And maybe, just maybe, they were both tired of being broken alone. I tried to run, but she found me before I took 10 steps. The silence in Kyle's room was heavy, almost too heavy. He sat on the edge of the bed, eyes fixed on the symbol glowing on his wrist, the Velari bonding mark. It had started to change color. What was once a soft blue had now turned into a burning red. Each color shift, Felexa said, meant the bond was moving forward. But Kyle didn't feel stronger. He felt trapped. Ever since the visit to the temple, the secret chamber filled with names of lost humans, Kyle hadn't been the same. The image of Jacob Sanders, the man who failed number 6, was stuck in his mind. He couldn't stop thinking about what Felexa had said. You will see everything in me, and I will see everything in you. No walls, no secrets, no escape. Kyle stood quietly by the window. It wasn't really a window, just a transparent energy panel looking out into the alien jungle. Red trees, floating flowers, creatures with soft lights moving through the thick air. He hadn't been outside since the bonding started. He hadn't had a moment alone. Until now. Felexa was gone, summoned to the council chambers. It was his chance. He quickly grabbed a light suit from the chamber wall. It was made of soft armor and designed for heat and stealth. He wrapped it around himself and slipped through the main hall like a shadow. Guards were standing near the exits, but none of them stopped him. They didn't expect him to leave. Why would he? He was Earth's hero, Velari's chosen one, the husband of a warrior princess. But Kyle didn't care anymore. He just wanted to be free. The outer doors hissed open with a whisper, and the humid jungle air hit his face. He took one deep breath and stepped outside. One step. The leaves crunched under his boot. The path ahead was dark but glowing in some places. Alien bugs floated nearby, pulsing like lanterns. 2 steps. 3. 4. His heart pounded. Sweat formed on his brow. 5. 6. 7. He looked back once. The temple still stood there, large and silent, glowing like a sleeping beast. Kyle pushed forward. 8 steps. 9. And then, suddenly, He froze. A presence was behind him. He didn't hear anything. He didn't see anything. But he felt it, like a sudden drop in air pressure. The jungle became cold. The wind stopped moving. And a voice whispered behind him. 10. He turned. And there she was. Falexa, standing in the shadows, barely breathing hard. Her eyes glowed in the dark. Her body pulsed with raw alien energy. And her face, stone cold. "I told you not to run," she said. Kyle stepped back. I just needed space. Time. No, she said, stepping forward. "You wanted out." He nodded, helplessly. "Yes. I can't do this. I'm not built for your rituals. Your bonding. Your pressure." She walked closer. "So you would run. Back to Earth. Leave the bond broken." Kyle tried to explain, but the words felt empty. "You don't understand what I'm feeling." "I do," Falexa said softly. "I feel it, remember. Through the bond. Every doubt. Every fear. Every broken thought in your mind. I feel it inside me." She raised her hand and pointed to her chest. "And it hurts." Kyle looked down. For a moment, he forgot she was a warrior. He forgot she was strong enough to crush metal. Right now, she looked like someone afraid of being left. "I'm not strong enough to go through with number 6, Kyle said, voice breaking. "I'll fail. Like Jacob." Falexa walked forward until she was only inches from him. "You think I don't fear that too?" she asked. "I remember when he ran. I remember how empty I felt when his mind shattered. I couldn't fix him." She touched Kyle's arm. "But you're not him." "How do you know that?" he whispered. "Because Jacob ran without ever trying. You're still here. Scared, yes. But you stayed longer than any human before you. That matters." For the first time, Kyle didn't pull away when she touched him. He looked into her eyes. He didn't just see strength now. He saw something hidden beneath her hard skin, beneath her warrior pride. She was lonely. Just like him. And somehow, in this crazy world, with a marriage he never agreed to, with bondings he didn't understand, she still looked at him like he was chosen. Not forced, not trapped. Chosen. "Can I ask you something?" Kyle said softly. Falexa nodded. "If I do this, if I go all the way to number 6, and I survive, what happens to me?" Falexa looked at him with a strange expression. "You stop being just human," she said. "You become ours. Mind, body, soul. You will belong to me, and I to you." Kyle swallowed hard. "And number 7. Falexa smirked faintly. "Let's survive 6 first." She reached out her hand. Kyle hesitated. Then, slowly, he took it. Together, they walked back toward the glowing temple. Kyle had only made it 10 steps alone. But maybe, just maybe, he could make it all the way, if he wasn't alone anymore. What happens during number 6? No one will say. Kyle stood at the center of a circular chamber that felt more like a temple than a room. The air was thick with energy. Not heat, but something deeper. It buzzed across his skin like invisible lightning. The floor beneath his feet was warm. The lights above pulsed with soft golden waves. Strange alien symbols floated in the air, glowing in slow circles around him. But what truly made Kyle uneasy was the silence. Not one voice. Not one footstep outside the door. Even Falexa, standing directly across from him, hadn't said a word since they entered. "Falexa," Kyle whispered, his voice echoing through the stillness. "Is this number 6? She nodded slowly. "Yes." There was no smirk on her face now. No teasing. No pride. She looked serious, almost afraid. "This chamber," she said quietly, "is called Kronze. It means the mirror of all." Kyle shifted his feet nervously. "So, this is the final step before the bond is complete." Falexa didn't answer right away. Then she said, "No, This is the step where the truth is revealed. If we survive this, only then do we begin true bonding. Kyle's chest tightened, and if we don't? Felix's glowing eyes flickered. Then one of us shatters, and the other is left broken. He wanted to run. Again, his legs screamed for it, but he didn't move. He remembered what she had said in the jungle, that she felt his fear through the bond. And yet, she hadn't abandoned him. She came after him. Now, it was his turn to stay. "Tell me what to do," Kyle said, trying to keep his voice steady. Felixa nodded and stepped forward. "Lie down in the center. The symbols will scan you. They will open your mind to mine, and mine to yours. Will it hurt?" She hesitated. "Only if you fight it." Kyle laid down on the floor. The glowing rings swirled tighter around his body. One by one, they pulsed faster. The moment his head touched the smooth surface, he felt a pull, not physical, but mental. His thoughts were leaving him. Memories floated from his mind. Childhood, Earth, his brother, the fire, the smell of smoke, the screams, the helplessness. He gasped. And then, he wasn't alone in his mind anymore. Suddenly, Kyle wasn't in the chamber. He was standing inside a burning building, his 10-year-old self staring at him from a hallway. His little brother was trapped behind a wall of flame. "Help me," the boy cried. Kyle tried to run, but his feet were heavy like stone. The same nightmare again. But this time, he couldn't wake up. Felix's voice echoed all around him. "This is your guilt, Kyle. The wound you never healed." He turned and saw her. Felixa stood among the flames, watching the scene like it was a painting. "How do you know about this?" Kyle shouted. "I don't," she said. "You showed me. This is number 6. The fire faded. The scene changed. Now he saw her memories. He was inside a battlefield, full of broken ships and fallen bodies. Felixa stood over her sister's body, her armor cracked, her hands shaking. "I wasn't strong enough," she whispered in pain. "She died because of me." Kyle saw it all. Her fear, her failure, her silent screams. The same woman who had carried him like a feather had once collapsed under grief. "Felixa," Kyle breathed. More scenes flooded in, from both of them. Kyle saw the bullies from his youth, his mother walking away from their home. Nights alone under the stars, wishing someone would care. Felixa saw humans laughing, hugging, dancing, things she never understood. She had trained her entire life to be a warrior. She didn't know what love was. Not real love, not the kind that made people stay. She wanted to understand. That's why she had chosen him. Then came the hardest part. A mirror appeared in front of them. They were side by side now, in the same mind space, staring into it. But the mirror didn't show their bodies. It showed their souls. Kyle's looked cracked, pieces glued together. Still holding, but barely. Felixa's soul was glowing with fire, but hollow in the center, like she had built armor around a deep, cold emptiness. "Can we fix each other?" Kyle asked. The mirror shimmered. One word appeared in glowing letters. "Yes, if you stay." A wave of energy crashed over them. Kyle screamed. Felixa dropped to her knees. The chamber spun, lights flashing, and their bodies arched off the floor. The bond was finalizing. Pain, pressure, emotion. Then, stillness. Kyle opened his eyes. He was lying in the same chamber, but the air felt lighter. The pain was gone. Beside him, Felixa sat, breathing hard. Her eyes were wet. She had cried. "Did we make it?" Kyle asked, voice rough. She nodded, smiling slowly. "We made it through number 6. Kyle sat up, still stunned. "So, we're bonded now." Felixa leaned closer. Her voice shook. "No, now we begin the true bond." Kyle blinked. "What do you mean?" She touched his wrist. The glowing mark had changed again, now golden, with 7 small stars. "You survived the mirror," she said. "Now comes the real challenge. Number 7. I thought I would die, but something woke inside me." The chamber was quiet again. But this time, it wasn't cold. Kyle lay still, eyes open, staring at the glowing ceiling of the bonding temple. It felt different now. Softer, warmer, almost like it was breathing with him. Something had changed. Inside him. Around him. He didn't know how to explain it, but ever since they had completed number 6, Kyle didn't feel completely human anymore. It wasn't that he had powers, or that he had suddenly become stronger. It was deeper than that. He could feel things now. Feel her. He heard footsteps and turned his head slowly. Thalexa entered the chamber, dressed not in armor this time, but in soft cloth robes. Her glowing blue eyes were calm, her shoulders no longer stiff with pride, but relaxed with something else, something close to peace. "Kyle," she said quietly, "you're awake." He tried to sit up but groaned. His muscles still ached, but not like before. It was like his body was rebuilding itself from the inside. "I feel strange," he whispered. She knelt beside him and placed a warm hand on his chest. "That's because your mind and mine are still connecting. You've passed through the mirror. Few ever do." Kyle looked into her eyes. "You were there," he said softly. "You saw everything." Thalexa nodded. "And so did you." He remembered it all now. Her memories, her loss, her pain. And she had seen his. But neither of them had run. Suddenly, the chamber lights dimmed. A deep hum filled the room, and the bonding mark on Kyle's wrist began to glow, brighter than ever. Not red, not gold, white. Thalexa's eyes widened. "No one told me this would happen," she said. "What is it?" Kyle asked, struggling to sit up fully. "The bond. It's reacting," she said, "not just finishing. It's transforming." Before either of them could speak again, the chamber walls split apart, opening like the petals of a giant metal flower. A new path appeared, covered in soft silver dust, lined with floating lights, and at the end, a platform glowing with white flame. Thalexa stood slowly. "Kyle, this wasn't part of the ritual." "You mean this isn't number 7? He asked. "No," she whispered. "This is something else." They walked together, slowly, toward the glowing platform. Every step Kyle took felt lighter. He could hear Thalexa's heartbeat without looking at her. He could sense her breath, her emotions, even her doubts. And she could feel his. They were one now, not just in ritual, but in soul. When they reached the center of the platform, a voice echoed from the walls. Ancient. Not male. Not female. Just powerful. A human passed through number 6 and still stands. This has not happened in over 2,000 years. Kyle looked around. Who's talking? Thalexa bowed her head. The voice of the core. The ancient memory of Valari. The voice spoke again. Shall the transformation begin? Kyle turned to Thalexa. What does it mean by transformation? She stared at him, breath caught in her chest. You're being chosen, not just as my mate, but as a bridge, a link between our species. You mean, I'll stop being fully human. Your body will remain, she said, but your soul will evolve. The white flame rose around the platform. It didn't burn. It hummed. It wrapped around them like warm water. Kyle felt his body go numb. Then heavy. Then weightless. He saw lights. Stars. A vast web connecting galaxies flowing through him like electricity. Then he saw himself, standing in a room on Earth. But he wasn't alone. He saw other humans behind him. And beside him stood Thalexa, holding his hand. They weren't fighting anymore. They weren't strangers. They were together. When Kyle opened his eyes again, the flame was gone. The chamber was silent once more. But something had changed. His skin shimmered faintly. His eyes felt sharper. His heart beat slower, but stronger. And when he spoke, his voice carried a strange echo, like it came from two places at once. "What happened?" Felexa looked at him with awe. She reached forward and touched his face, like it was the first time. "You passed through the core," she whispered. "You were remade. Kyle, you're not just my mate now. You're Velari born." Kyle blinked. "So, I'm not human anymore." "You're more than human," she said softly. "You're the bond that never existed before." Suddenly, a loud alarm blared through the temple. Felexa's smile faded. She turned to the open chamber door where a Velari guard rushed in. "What is it?" she asked. "The council," the guard shouted. "They know the human survived number 6 and passed through the core." Kyle frowned. "Is that bad?" Felexa's eyes narrowed. "To some, it is. There are those who believe no outsider should ever touch the core. They may try to end this bond. By force." Kyle stood taller now. Stronger. The glow on his wrist brightened. "Let them try," he said. Felexa stepped closer. Her voice was low and dangerous. "They will come for us at sunrise. You're ready for number 7, right?" The sky above Velari Prime turned crimson at dawn. It was the color of war. Kyle stood at the edge of the temple's great platform, dressed in dark silver robes lined with symbols that only appeared after he passed through the core. His body was still human, but not fully. Not anymore. His mind was sharper, his reflexes quicker, and his emotions more connected than ever before. Behind him, Felexa tightened the straps on her armor. "They're coming," she said, her voice calm but tense. Kyle turned. "The council?" She nodded. "All 12 elders. They'd voted last night." "And?" Kyle asked. 7 want the bond destroyed. 5 support us." Kyle looked down at his glowing wrist. The golden mark had now turned white with blue flames, a sign of completed fusion. It was no longer just a marriage mark. It was proof that he had crossed into something never seen before. "They fear you, Kyle," Felexa said, "not because of what you are, but what you might become." Moments later, the council arrived. 12 tall figures, cloaked in black and gold, entered the great hall. Each one radiated ancient power. Their eyes glowed with Velari fire. None of them smiled. The lead elder, Maruk, stepped forward. "You broke tradition," he said to Felexa. "You went beyond number 6. You allowed a human to touch the core." Felexa did not flinch. He survived. Maruk turned to Kyle. "You are not Velari. You are not one of us. And yet the core responded to you." He narrowed his eyes. "Explain this." Kyle stepped forward, his voice steady. "I didn't ask for this bond. I didn't know what I signed. But I stayed. I fought. I opened my mind. And in return, your own ancient power chose me." The hall fell quiet. A younger counselor whispered, "It is true. The core only awakens for souls with balance." Another argued, "He's an outsider. His kind should not know our ways." Felexa raised her voice. "He knows us better than many of you. He felt my pain. I felt his. He didn't run." Kyle took a deep breath. "I may not have been born Velari," he said, "but I became one when I stood in the fire and didn't break." He paused. "You fear me, but you should fear what happens if you reject me. Because this bond is the only way our worlds survive together." A long silence followed. Then Maruk raised his hand, and a sphere of white energy floated above the platform. "This is the final trial," he said. "Number 7. Kyle blinked. "Wait. There's an actual trial." Felexa looked at him. "Every bonded pair must pass the final test. But it's rarely done, and never with a human." Kyle stepped forward. "What is it?" Maruk's voice was deep and cold. "You must walk into each other's pasts, one last time. And this time, You must carry each other's pain without crumbling. If even one of you breaks, the bond is severed forever. Kyle and Felexa exchanged a look. Let's do it, Kyle said. Felexa nodded. Together. The white sphere expanded and pulled them in. Everything went white. Then, Kyle was in a war. He wasn't human anymore. He was Felexa. He saw through her eyes. He felt her agony. He held a sword made of plasma and fought a beast made of stone and fire. He saw her sister fall beside her, stabbed through the heart. And worst of all, he felt her silence. The way she never allowed herself to cry. The way she locked every scream deep inside, so she could keep bleeding. Kyle gasped, choking on the weight of her pain. But he stood firm. Then, roles reversed. Felexa opened her eyes inside Kyle's past. She saw Earth, a burning house. A younger Kyle screaming his brother's name. Smoke, glass, fire. The moment he failed to save him. She felt the guilt, the helplessness, the weight of always pretending to be okay. Tears ran down her cheeks. But she stood firm too. When the light faded, they returned to the platform. Both standing, both shaking, both still breathing. Murrock stared in silence. Then he spoke. The bond is complete. The other elders bowed. The core has spoken. You are no longer two. You are one. A loud cheer burst from the watchers on the temple walls. Valeri citizens, warriors, and even a few humans who had traveled with Kyle. Felexa turned to him. Do you feel it? She asked. Kyle smiled. Yeah, like a sun rising inside me. The rest of the day passed in a blur. Valeri and humans gathered. Words of peace were exchanged. A new alliance was formed, not just through a contract, but through the first bond between species. Later, as the stars lit up above the jungle sky, Kyle stood alone on the temple balcony. Felexa joined him, wrapping her arms around him from behind. So, she whispered, you're ready for number 7, right? Kyle laughed quietly. That was number 7. She grinned. Oh no, I meant the other number 7. Kyle blinked. Wait, you don't mean... Felexa gently pulled him away from the railing. Valeri bonding never truly ends, husband, she purred. And I believe tonight, we start a new cycle. Kyle groaned, but smiled. And this time, he didn't want to run.